Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Dave Bowman. I'm a data analyst in our business intelligence unit here at the Winnipeg Police Service. I'm here today to present key findings, observations, and highlights found within the 2022 Statistical Report. My presentation, along with the report itself, is centered on four key themes: complement, calls for service, crimes, and clearance rates. Looking first at our complement. In 2022, the Winnipeg Police Service had an authorized complement of 1,356 police officers. That's up one from the previous year, along with 561 civilian staff members, down one from the previous year, totaling 1,917 police and staff members, which is unchanged from 2021. While the number of police officers in Winnipeg has been trending downward for some time, the population of the city continues to rise. We know that the officer to population ratio has been shrinking since 2012, as depicted in the bar chart at the top of the page, with the blue bars representing Winnipeg's growing population and the yellow line depicting the declining number of police officers in our city. As you can see, that gap is widening. Looking at the demographic composition of those police officers, it's important to note that as an organization, we strive to be reflective of the community that we serve. Of the new recruits hired in 2022, 23% were women, 16% were racialized peoples, and nearly 21% were Indigenous peoples. I can tell you that we've seen an upward trend in new hires from these demographic groups over the last 5 or 6 years. So while there is still a gap between our recruit and officer demographic profiles, if we maintain similar hiring practice in 22 going forward, I'd anticipate that gap will continue narrowing over time as it has for the last number of years. Across the service, nearly 1/4 of our members are multilingual, covering 40 different languages. Turning now to our calls for service. In 2022, there were over 700,000 total calls to the Communications Center, an average of nearly 2,000 calls each day. This represents an increase of 6% over the previous year and nearly 14% over the 5-year average. And while the total calls to the comm center have continued to trend upward for some time, the number of events we're able to dispatch officers to has reached somewhat of a saturation point, almost identical to the previous year and consistent with the 5-year average. And while the number of events we're able to dispatch officers to remains relatively unchanged, the severity of the events we're dispatching to continues to rise. Emergency dispatched events increased by nearly 12% over the previous year and by nearly 18% over the 5-year average. The 22,433 emergency dispatched events in 2022 were a record high for the city of Winnipeg. Looking at the specific types of events that we're dispatching officers to, check well-being remained the top citizen-generated event for the 3rd year in a row, followed by domestic events, disturbances, suspicious persons, and family trouble. Turning now to our crime statistics. A couple of brief notes on how we count and categorize the crime stats contained in this report. These are crimes reported to the police, and we don't take into account other collection methods, for example, self-reported victimization surveys. As far as how we count crime, the methodology used in this report is aligned with Statistics Canada and the parameters set out in the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey, or UCR. In 2022, total crime in Winnipeg increased by nearly 26% over the previous year and by 17% over the 5-year average. While the large percent increases are no doubt concerning, when looking at total crime volume over the past five or 6 years, we can see that Winnipeg is returning to the upward trend observed pre-pandemic. 2017, 2018, and 2019 reported increases of about 10% each year in total crime. Now, when the pandemic hit in 2020, we saw a significant impact on crime in our city. 2020 and 2021 saw notable decreases of 10% and 8% respectively in total crime. So when comparing 2022 to pre-pandemic levels from 2019, we see about a 4% increase over that previous trajectory. A similar trend was observed for property crime in 2022, with a large year-over-year percent increase of 32% and 20% over the 5-year average. When looking at property crime volume over the past 6 years, we see a similar pattern emerge as we did with total crime. In 2017, 18, and 19, those years reported increases of about 12% each year in property crime. And similarly, in 2020 and 2021, we really saw the pandemic impact with respect to property crimes, seeing notable decreases of 14% and 11% respectively. So when comparing 2022 to the pre-pandemic levels from 2019, we see about a 2% increase over that previous trajectory. Now, violent crime is the exception, as we really didn't see any downturn during the pandemic. Yet we still see a large year-over-year increase of 19% over the previous year and nearly 24% over the 5-year average. In 2022, violent crime severity reached its highest level since 2009, including a record number of homicides at 53. Finally, other crimes, which are comprised primarily of bail and probation violations, saw a decrease over the previous year as well as the 5-year average. In terms of property crime specifically, primary drivers for the increases in 2022 include break and enters up nearly 24% over the previous year, motor vehicle thefts up 27% from the previous year, and shoplifting under $5,000 up 37% from the previous year. Also of note, the number of arsons decreased by 15% from the previous year. Vehicle accessories, including catalytic converters, remain the most stolen property for a second year in a row. And while catalytic converter thefts continued to increase through 2022, we did see a flattening off of the sharp increases observed in 2020 and 2021. With respect to clearance, there were more property crimes solved this year than there were last. But with large jumps in overall volume, the proportion of property crimes cleared actually decreased to 8.4% in 2022. In terms of violent crime, notable increases include the record number of homicides at 53, a 23% increase over the previous year. Robberies were up 26% over the previous year, and all types of assault were up over the previous year, including a 21% increase in sexual assaults. Other notable trends in violent crime include a 9.4% decrease in firearms crimes, along with a 14% decrease in gun-related calls for service. Nearly 12% increase in knife crimes and a nearly 38% increase in bear spray crimes over the previous year. The use of bear spray in violent crimes has doubled since 2019. So similar to property crimes, there were more violent crimes solved this year than there were last, but with the large jump in overall volume, the proportion of violent crimes cleared actually decreased to 55.3% in 2022. It's worth noting that 14% of violent crimes could not be solved because the victim refused to participate in the investigation. That's 1,900 violent crimes that couldn't be solved. Of the record 53 homicides, 44 were cleared, or 84%. It's worth noting that homicide clearance rates in Winnipeg have remained above 80% since 2011. In 2021, the national homicide clearance rate was 67%. Winnipeg has consistently been well above the national average with respect to homicide clearance rates, which is truly a testament to the hard work and dedication of our talented investigators. Finally, when we look at violent crimes by the status of the accused, we can say that 1 in 5 violent crimes cleared by charge involve an accused person violating their bail, probation, or other similar court order. Looking now at youth crime. Youth crime increased by 43% over the previous year, but decreased by nearly 14% over the 5-year average. Youth crime in Winnipeg had been declining steadily for a number of years, reaching a recent historic low in 2021. The large year-over-year percent increase is influenced by this recent historic low. So while the year-over-year percent change is no doubt concerning, it's important to situate what we saw last year within the larger context of the last 5 or 6 years and beyond. It'll be important to keep an eye on this trend going forward through 2023 to see if last year was an outlier or if this is the start of an emerging trend. When looking at the youths accused of crimes last year, nearly half were processed via other means, including warnings, cautions, community programs, and diversionary programs. Turning now to crime severity, just a couple notes on how this is calculated and what it means. The Crime Severity Index considers both the volume of crime, which we've already spoken about, as well as the seriousness of crime. In the calculation of the CSI, each offense is assigned a weight derived from the average sentences handed down by the criminal courts. The more serious the average sentence, the higher the weight for that offense. So, for example, a homicide carries a much higher weight than that of an assault. These indices are useful in that they give us a clearer picture of crime severity than do simple counts or rates. As well, these indices control for population growth, allowing for meaningful comparisons over time and across jurisdictions. In 2022, total crime severity in Winnipeg increased by nearly 27% over the previous year. Violent and nonviolent crime severity increased by similar margins of 24% and 28% respectively. As mentioned previously, in 2022, violent crime severity reached its highest level since 2009, including a record number of 53 homicides. Total crime severity and nonviolent crime severity also reached levels comparable to 2009, but remained below levels seen earlier in the 2000s. Now, looking back to 2021, Winnipeg ranked third nationally in total crime severity behind Lethbridge and Kelowna, second nationally in violent crime severity behind Regina, and sixth nationally in nonviolent crime severity behind Lethbridge, Moncton, Kelowna, Saskatoon, and Regina. So while national data on 2022 crime severity won't be made available until July, we can see how Winnipeg crime rates and total crime severity compared to the previous years, as well as other prairie cities. That said, we do know at this point that Winnipeg is not alone in experiencing large year-over-year increases in crime last year. Edmonton, for example, released their annual report last month and reported a record level of violent crime for the year. I anticipate the same may be true for other jurisdictions across the country, while others will likely remain flat or even see some decreases. Looking now at where crime took place within the city in 2022, we can see that nearly 20% of all crime took place in the North District, 27% took place in the Central District, nearly 30% took place in the West District, and 23% took place in the East District. While the proportions of total crime are relatively comparable between the districts, it's easy to see how crime in our Central District, a slice of geography covering about 14 square kilometers, was far more concentrated than in the West District, for example, an area covering about 221 square kilometers. We can also see that the increases in crime experience across Winnipeg were most pronounced in our Central District, which saw an increase in total crime of 37% over the previous year. Within the Central District lies the downtown and Portage Avenue zones. Again, looking back to 2021, Central District, along with the downtown and Portage Avenue zones within it, saw large decreases in total crime when compared to other areas of the city. With many people returning back to work downtown in 2022, these areas saw some of the most pronounced increases in crime last year, most notably property crimes. So with that said, to revisit some of the main messages from the report as well as my presentation, total crime increased over 2021 as well as the 5-year average, returning to the upward trend observed pre-pandemic. Violent crime severity reached its highest level since 2009, including a record number of homicides at 53. Property crime increased over 2021 as well as the 5-year average, returning to the upward trend observed pre-pandemic. The large year-over-year percent change is influenced by that recent historic low in 2021. Youth crime increased over 2021, but fell below the 5-year average. Youth crime in Winnipeg, and not just Winnipeg, but across Canadian jurisdictions, had been declining steadily for a number of years, resulting in recent historic lows in 2021. Increases in total crime were most pronounced in our Central District, as well as the downtown and Portage Avenue zones contained within. Calls to the Communications Centre increased over 2021 and by the 5-year average, with an average of nearly 2,000 calls being received every day. And finally, the total number of dispatched events remained relatively unchanged from 2021. However, emergency dispatched events increased over 2021 as well as the 5-year average. That concludes my presentation, and with that, I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. No, we tend to stay away from projecting. So much of our crime is, as you know, seasonally based. So even looking at the first quarter of this year compared to last year isn't always the greatest picture of where crime is headed for the entire year. We're headed into that very busy summer season, so I think we'll have a much better picture of where crime is headed for this year once the summer months are through. Yeah, so we have a priority system. So our call center has a priority ranking system, ranking from 0 to 9, 0 being the most serious, 9 being lesser serious. So we define an emergency dispatched event as a priority 0, 1, or 2. Oh, yes, sir. Yeah, so to repeat the question, asking why we're seeing, that stable increase in violent crime, whereas other crime types, were really impacted by the pandemic. In terms of causality, I can't really speak to that. I think the chief will have some more context to shed some light on what's happening in the city. But from a statistical perspective, violent crime had remained, fairly consistent over the last 5 years. We're seeing some smaller increases prior to last year, but this year, yeah, we've really seen a notable increase year over year. Sure. So to repeat the question, how much work goes into a report like this, and what types of data go into a report like this? Well, you've seen, for example, the 700,000 calls for service that we receive at our communications center. So each one of those calls is a line of data. Each one of the 72,000 crimes is a row of data, and there are other data elements that find their way into this report as well. So as far as the planning and number crunching around a report like this, it really starts kind of on January 1st and leads all the way through till the end of May here. So we are releasing a couple months earlier than we usually do this year. But yeah, it's very much a team effort within our organizational development and support division, and really supported by the business intelligence unit as well. Yeah, so the question again, to repeat, what are we anticipating as far as the Stats Canada release in July? It's tough to say. I mentioned Edmonton. They released their annual statistical report last month, which indicated, they had a record high in terms of violent crime there, as well as, increases in some of their other crime severity indices. So I would expect Edmonton and some of our other prairie counterparts to see increases. I saw some preliminary figures from Calgary, who had a different experience. They were a bit more flat and saw some decreases in some areas. So I think it'll be a bit of a mixed bag when that report comes out in July, but we'll certainly know or learn more then, yeah.
Well, I was just going to ask, what's the reason for the early report this year?
Yeah, so to repeat the question, why the early release this year? And I think the easiest answer is that Statistics Canada can sometimes be a bit of a moving target in terms of their release dates. During the pandemic, they saw a lot of slowdown as they diverted resources to other priority areas. So their release, I think, crept into August a couple of years ago. So, as far as, being transparent and open with the public about what's going on in their city over the last year, releasing a stats report in the middle of the summer, more than halfway through the year, just doesn't feel like a timely thing to do. So we wanted to push it back a little bit and bring us in line with some of the other agencies like Edmonton, who are releasing kind of in the later spring. Okay, yeah. So to repeat the question, yeah, just what do we mean by that upward trend? So, part of the goal here today was to situate 2022 within the last 5 or 6 years of crime. And because we saw such significant decreases over the last couple of years during the pandemic, particularly with respect to property crime, so we see those large year-over-year percent changes. But again, when you compare 2022 to 2019 totals, which we don't do in the report, and it's generally not a thing that we would do, but the COVID-19 pandemic was kind of an exceptional circumstance. So when we do look at our 2022 numbers in relation to 2019, we see about a 4% increase from pre-pandemic levels and a 2% increase over property crime levels. So just trying to situate those percent changes within the larger context of the long-term trend of crime in our city. Yeah, so we present at various levels of the service regularly, whether it's to our investigative units or our executive team as well. So what you see here, we present to the public annually. We also have some monthly public available statistics via crime maps, as well as our monthly reporting. So yeah, it's a very similar type of reporting that goes to our executive group as well as our investigative groups to help them inform where those problem spots are, what's up, what's down, and how they might wish to consider directing resources towards those issues. Sure. And to repeat the question again, the question was about spikes in property crime specifically. So I would say the primary drivers for the increases in property crime would include increases in break and enter, which were up 24% over the previous year, increases in motor vehicle thefts, which were up 27% over the previous year, and increases in shoplifting under $5,000, which are up 37% over the previous year. That's what I've got in my notes here. You'll have access to the report, I believe, now. So you'll see a more detailed breakdown by individual crime category there that you'll be able to make some determinations there. To repeat the question, can we speak to the number of crimes that aren't reported? Unfortunately, I can't speak to crimes that go unreported. I'm only capable of speaking to the number of crimes that are reported to the police. So to repeat the question, as a data analyst, what's my view on the percentage increases and what does that look like in a realistic sense? Well, I think the answer is it really depends on what you're looking at. So for example, in youth crime, we saw a really significant year-over-year percent change, 43% over the previous year. But it's important to look beyond those year-over-year or in the monthly reporting month-over-month percent changes because we're dealing with relatively small numbers. So the caution is when dealing with smaller numbers, and I think we're in and around 1,000 or 1,500 youth crimes, the difference of a couple hundred crimes can make a really large statistical difference from a percent change standpoint. So that's why we really like to look at it. When we present data, via the report to the media through our public information office, we always provide that 5-year trend as well to kind of help eliminate any sort of extreme percent jumps that we see in crime, like we did in property crime and youth crime come to mind for this last year. Again, I would say it's preliminary and probably too early to say where we're headed for 2023. Even looking at Q1 23 versus Q1 22, so much of our crime is seasonally based here in Winnipeg. So I think we'll have a much better picture of where crime is headed in 2023 after some of these summer months have passed. We'll have a much clearer picture, I would say. Yeah. So to repeat the question, do we track demographics related to victim demographic, accused demographics? The answer, in short, is no. So the Uniform Crime Reporting Survey, as it currently stands, doesn't track victim or offender race data. That will be changing in the years to come. So in future reports, 1 or 2 years down the lines, that's probably something that you will see as part of our statistical reporting. But as it currently stands, that has yet to be implemented, and they're in conversations about how that will look and how that will roll out nationally, and how that will affect everything from our data systems to our officer training as well. So there will be implications there, but as of today, those have yet to be implemented. Yeah, so repeating the question, with respect to the bail, the 1 in 5 cleared by charge were violating their bail or probation at the time of the offense. I wouldn't say I was surprised. It was an interesting analytical piece to undertake. So this is a kind of a new topic area that's hit a lot of the national attention in the recent months. So I wouldn't say that I was surprised, but nonetheless, an interesting study to undertake. So repeat the question. The importance of having this data. Yeah, we saw police agencies from across Canada support the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police with a data project around this topic of repeat bail offenders and the proportion of crime that folks on bail or probation are accounting for in our country. So we've seen that at the national level. We've seen a lot of that data move its way up to Parliament, and my understanding is that the federal government has introduced new legislation that addresses that very issue. So, the use for having this type of data, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. So it's important to have that data backing up what you're trying to say. Thank you.